Good morning.
Morning.
Yeah, so same Marmakomo sheets as last week. Just want to start off by thanking Rabbi Safran for correcting me. I mentioned that the same two personalities that we find in the Gemara in Sanhedrin, where the Gemara tells us over there that Rava created the Golem and he sent it to Rav Zera. So we have a similar chavrusa in Megillah. But Rav Safran corrected me. It was not Rava, it was Rabba. So the same Rav Zera, but the person who shechted Rav Zera in the Gemara Megillah, that was Rabba. And over here, all right, it's Rava sending the Golem to Rav Zera. Okay. So Rav Zera had interesting relationships. We saw last week that the idea of being able to create some form of life through the Sefer Yetzirah, assuming a person is in a high level of righteousness, is something that's possible. And that's what we find in the Gemara. The Shach tells us in Yoredeya that although it's mutter officially l'chadchila to do so, you have to be on a very high level of chasidus, and therefore, Bedoros halalu, in these generations, we don't play games with different tzirufe, osios, the combination of letters of Hashem, and therefore we no longer engage in making any form of life, artificial life. That was the comment of the Shach. We mentioned that there's a tshuva from the Chacham Tzvi who speaks about the possibility, or at least he questions if it's shaykh to have a golem serve as the 10th man. That was the shaila of the Chacham Tzvi, which interestingly the Mishnah Berurah quotes. And then we had the Sheilas Yavitz, or Yaakov Emden, the son of the Chacham Tzvi, who quotes his father. And he says, based on the idea of the Chesed Lavram, who was the grandfather of the Chidar, of Avram Azuloi, that even if you're able to make a Gavra, a Golem, there's absolutely no neshama, and that's why there's no koach hadibur. So obviously, the person created through Sefer Yetzirah could not count as the 10th man. Now, getting to the Maral. The Maral famously, or supposedly, created a golem. Seeing this background from last week, there's no question that it's possible for someone of his caliber, perhaps, to be able to do so. The question is, where does the story come from? Now, a lot of this is really based on the research, very exciting research by Dr. Schneur Lyman. I'm going to share much of this with you today. He mentions that the very first source we have in all literature about the Maral creating some kind of golem goes back to 1837. It was actually in a French magazine where it speaks about the story of the Maral creating a golem, and then Erev Shabbos turning on the golem, having him draw water from the well or some other kind of water source, and then the Maral got involved with other preparations and forgot to turn off the golem. So now they're in shul, everyone's there davening Friday night, and there's this massive flood happening throughout the city because the golem is going crazy. So this is right after saying Mizmor Shir Liyom HaShabbos, which is officially the acceptance of Shabbos, but then the Maral's informed the golem is still on. So he runs out, he erases one of the letters on the forehead of the golem. Golem is now officially turned off. He gets back in the shul and says, okay, Chevra, we're now going to say Mizmor Shir Liyom HaShabbos one more time. Now that story was created to explain the interesting minhag that we do find. And in the main synagogue in Prague, the minhag was to say Mizmor Shir Liyom HaShabbos twice. So that was explaining where the minhag comes from. Now, the truth is, I saw in the back of one of the volumes of the Chavadas of Rabbi Vada Yosef, he quotes sources explaining, in reality, where does that minhag actually come from. He says in Prague, in the main synagogue, they would take on Shabbos early, so the whole Friday night service was taking place before Shkia, and they did Karobach in the real way. They had people playing instruments. So they had Lechadodi, they had the whole thing with people playing different instruments to accompany the davening through Mizmor Shir Yom HaShabbos. So the first Mizmor Shir Yom HaShabbos, that was together with the instruments. And then when they had in mind to officially accept upon themselves Shabbos, they would put all the instruments away and say Mizmor Shir Yom HaShabbos a second time. That's where Rabbi Vadia says the minhag actually comes from. But this story of the Maral and the Golem goes back to 1837. Now we did see that the Chacham Tzvi himself says that his grandfather told him about his ancestor, the great Rav Eliyahu Baal Shem Tov, who supposedly did make a golem, right? And also mentions this idea of erasing some of the letters on the forehead of the golem to turn it off so it shouldn't go and get out of control. So we do have a precedent in real halachic literature that such a thing may have happened. Okay, Lemaisa though, how did the Maral and the Golem become famous? It's based on a sefer, Niflos Maral. Niflos Maral is a sefer that was authored supposedly by the son-in-law of the Maral, the Mari Katz, Rav Yitzchak Katz, who was a very chashuv person in his own right. However, the sefer was actually published by a Rav. His name was Rav Yehuda Yudel Rosenberg. Rav Yehuda Yudel Rosenberg was born in 1860. He was a Rav in Lublin, in Warsaw, in Lodz. And in 1930, he moved to Canada, where he lived in Toronto. He became the Morad Asra of Beth Jacob congregation in Toronto. Authored many very, very chashuv works, and we'll see a couple of them in a moment. In 1918, he moved from Toronto to Montreal. He became the chief rabbi of the United Hebrew Orthodox Congregations, and he remained in that position until 1935 when he passed away. So Rav Yehuda Yudel Rosenberg publishes this manuscript, Niflos Maral, and we'll just read the cover page together. It's on page 2. Zeh Sefer Niflos Maral. Bo Yusupar Osios, V'movsim V'niflos Me'ez Maran V'Rabban Shel Kol B'nei Hagola. Here we tell about the incredible miracles of the Maral, who was the leader of the entire diaspora. Hatzadik V'Hakodosh, Gon HaGo'onim, Nezer Yisrael V'Ateres Yishuoso, Mola Oretz Idkoso V'Geduloso, Hanikra Maral MiPrague, Zecher Tzadik V'Kodesh Levrocha. Ish Hifli Lasos Gedolos V'Noros Al Yedei HaGolam. The man who was able to do wondrous things through the creation of the Golem. Now, why did he do so? Now, we did see from the Shach, he mentions that one reason why you might have great people, at least in the past, using Sefer Yetzirah to create some form of life, was really to be Mekadesh Shem Shemayim, to show the world the truth and the power of Torah. In the case of the Golem, in the case of the Maral and the Golem, it sounds like he created it, Asher Bara B'Koach Chachmas HaKabbalah. He formed the Golem through the wisdom of Kabbalah, Lihilachem Neged Elilas Dam, to be able to defend the Jewish people against blood libels. Asher Nifritza B'Yamav, that were very prevalent in his times. Right, again, the Maral lived in the 1500s. Ulevar ha'emes le'ein kol, and the goal of the Golem was to defend the Jewish people and to clarify the truth that everyone should see, ki nikiyim Yisrael mikolon hazeh, that the Jewish people were innocent of this terrible accusation. HaSefer hazeh nichtav al yedei hagon hagadol Moreinu Marie Katz. Says Rabbi Rosenberg that this sefer was initially written by Rabbi Yitzchak Katz, the son-in-law of the Maral. V'hayasofun, and it was hidden in the great library, Deir Mitz, in the city of Mitz. And after the destruction that took place, it sounds like there were some wars going on. So after a turbulent time, Nafla harbe svarim atikim v'kisve yad biyad bidei ashiri ha'ir. Many of those manuscripts that were, until that point, hidden in the library, they came into the hands of some of the wealthy people of the city. V'harbe yagati v'amalti ad shemotzi yodi lohosig ha'ataka hazos. And I spent a lot of time, effort, and money until I was able to procure this manuscript. So this is being published by myself, Reb Yudol Rosenberg, and the year here is 1909. So he's claiming that they were first found 100 years ago, after the war took place, but officially this manuscript goes back even 300 years prior to when it was found. And now for the first time in the early 20th century, it's being shared with the world. Now, Rav Yehuda Yudah Rosenberg was a very chashuv Talmid Chacham. Take a look at page 3. The Rav on the left is a picture of Rav Yehuda Yudah Rosenberg. You can tell he's a very chashuv person. We were walking home from shul yesterday, and my almost 2-year-old saw Santa Claus writing something, and he said, Rabbi, but this is a rabbi, right? This is a chashuv Rav. And not only in appearance, but if you take a look at page 5, he was the author of some very chashuv svarim in halacha. Not only halacha, first of all, he was probably most well known for his sefer, a 3-volume set translating and explaining the Zohar. And the beginning on the right, on the left actually, in the top left, we have many different haskamos to his sefer Zohar from leading gedolim of his time. He also was the author of Yodos Nadarim, a perush on Mesechles Nadarim, and there in that sefer as well, he has many very reliable, authoritative haskamos. And then in the middle here, he has a sefer Mikveh Yehuda, where he explains, based on a mastery of the laws of mikvos, how is it possible to make a mikveh in your own home if you have to? Living in a time and place where it was very difficult to create a mikveh, in contrast to nowadays where it's not a big deal at all. But he explains in the sefer how theoretically you could gather rainwater and you could even stream it into your bathtub. And again, he has chashuv haskamos. Now, in the introduction to the Sefer Niflos Maral, surprisingly, there are no haskamos in this sefer. But let's read his Akdama on the top of page 3. Karim Yakarim, my precious readers, I place before you today an incredible treasure that was hidden for 300 years in the library in the city of Mitz, Habira, the capital. Hakol hayodim misaprim. Everyone speaks about. It sounds like there is definitely, a Mesorah of some sort that the Maral created a Prague using the Sefer Yetzirah. That he created a Golem using the Sefer Yetzirah in Prague. V'ulam berivos hayamim nisrofef hadavar kolkach. However, during the years, that tradition became weakened to the point where now we find many people denying the entire thing and suggesting maybe it was only a mashal, maybe the Maral himself never created any kind of golem. Emes ki kasher hagon hagodol Moreinu Yecheskel Landau Zal. Now it's true, we know the story of the Noda B'Yehuda, that when he was the Rav in the city of Prague, So he wanted to verify the story, supposedly, of the Maral's Golem. So he went up to the attic in the base Knesset of the shul of the Marag. What's that shul called? The Altanoi shul, which literally means the old new shul. And the legend is that in the attic of that shul in Prague lies the body of the Golem. So the Noda B'Yehuda, wanting to verify this, he donned himself in talis and tefillin, and he instructed 10 of his Talmidim to say Tehillim on his behalf, and he went up to the attic. V'achar kach kisheyored misham hayanikir b'fonav pachad u'bahala. And when he came down, it was clear in his face a sense of trepidation and fear. V'amar shehu mechazik al haba al isr shel meral. And after going up himself, he wanted to strengthen the isser that the Maral supposedly made of ever having anyone enter the attic. Labalyu kol ish lalos al oso haliyah. However, even once we had the testimony of the Noda B'Yehuda that clearly something is going on, as decades went by, shuvnis rofef hadavar etzel harbei anashim. Again, many people were skeptical. V'choze ba'avur shelo nechakek b'sefer kol inyan ben koros haYehudim. And the whole reason why people were questioning this is because it was never recorded in any sefer amongst the Yiddish people. Now that itself is probably the greatest question from a historical standpoint. Why was it never recorded? Abnam sofa emes liskalos, but now the truth is going to be revealed. V'ata yakiru v'yedu kol Yisrael ki hakol haya nirsham b'chsav al yedei chosno shel maral. That really the entire story we have documented by the son-in-law of the Maral, the Marie Katz. Ubaruch Hashem, asher azroni lahaseg ataka hazos. I thank God for allowing me and enabling me to find this manuscript. V'harbe kesev otzasi yolzeh. I spent a lot of money getting this. V'gam milvada kesev amalti harbe bezen. Besides the money, I spent a lot of time and effort in order to publish this and share it with the world. Ulezos akaveh, and therefore I hope. Ki kol doresh toshia yiyah asi todali ba'ad avodasi bezeh. I hope you have some level of appreciation for all of the money, time, and effort to share the authentic story of the Maral and the Golem. Okay, interesting, right?
What difference does it make if the Golem's real or not? If the story of the Golem's real or not?
Ooh, that's the big question here. What's the nafka mina? And the answer is there's no nafka mina. I'll tell you why. There's no nafka mina because we know it's possible. As I state in the Gemara. And the Chacham Tzvi said that he has a Mesorah from his grandfather, that in his own family, one of the great members created a golem. So that itself is all we need. I forget who it was, but somebody asked one of the great Rosh Yeshiva of the 20th century, maybe it was Rav Shach, maybe somebody else, is it true that the Maral made the golem? And his response was, I don't know. I wasn't there. But I'll tell you, what's more impressive is that he created the Tosfos Yontif. Right? The Tosfos Yontif being one of the great Talmidim of the Maral, he says, even if he made a golem, to me, the greatest miracle of the Maral is that he made the Tosfos Yontif. So the truth is, there's really no nafka mina lahalacha in this. It's an interesting exploration to see and maybe delve into kind of how stories unfold and evolve within our culture, and when do we just kind of blindly take things at face value, and when do they require more research? Laman ha'emes, just laman ha'emes. So Dr. Shner Lyman points out that there's another sefer that was authored by Rabbi Yehuda Yudel Rosenberg on page 4. This sefer is the Choshen HaMishpat. And this was also taken from a manuscript that he found in the great library in Mitz, the Choshen HaMishpat Shel HaKohen Gadol. The front page of this sefer, he describes what the story is about. HaSefer Hazeh Yar Or Bohir Al Choshen HaMishpat Shel HaKohen HaGadol Be'eza Otzer Segulas HaMalachim Hu Nimtza Ata. This sefer sheds light on the incredible, wondrous breastplate of the Kohen Gadol. V'gam nizker kan mofes nifla hafla b'pela shehere b'inyan zeh hagoen hagadol rashke behag kadosh elyon maral miprag. And we also tell that incredible, wondrous story of the Maral. HaSefer hazeh netak min haSefer klei HaKodesh. This sefer that I'm publishing was really copied from the Sefer Klei Kodesh in the manuscript form. That was one of those svarim that I found in the library in the capital of Mitz. V'huva lebeis hadafus al yedei hatzeir, and I brought this to the printing. Yehuda Yudel Rosenberg, who was a rav in Tarlo, he was a machaber svarim, Yodos Nadarim, Sharei Zohar, other great works, the author of the Niflos Maral, and Darshat Tzemer Ufishtim, which is a halachic work on Shatnez. And the claim here is that this manuscript goes back to the late 1500s, 1590. And again, it's a story of the Maral interacting with different noblemen regarding the stolen jewels of the Kohen Gadol's Choshen. And that's what he speaks about here in the Hagdama. One other reason why it's important, right? You look around the room, right? How many young men do we have here today for this particular shiur? And that might be the answer why, just to kind of steal the thunder of the shiur, that might be why Rabbi Rosenberg did what he did. We'll see in a moment. The Hagdama of this sefer, Sefer Choshen HaMishpat, he writes, Sefer Nifla Hazeh, Yochel Or Lahodia Maisa Pele Shikara B'mei Hagon Hagadol Kodesh Elyon Rashke Bahag Ran Maral Miprag, is telling an amazing story about the Maral. V'hadavar Noda Al Pi Siba Nifla Shenignevu Yud Beis Avnei Choshen. And we actually had a story recently. What was the museum in France? The Louvre, right? Where there was an incredible heist that took place. This story going back supposedly to the 1590s, a very similar story. There was the Royal Museum, the Beltmore Museum on Beltmore Street, it's called, where there were the 12 authentic original stones that were placed in the Choshen, and they were stolen. V'haganav hichlif es havanim yakarim al avnei zechuches. And the person who stole these stones replaced them with glass stones. Shenasu im osam hagavanim shel avnei choshen hamitim. That he made the glass stones the exact same color as the real stones in the Choshen. V'aganeva lo haisen nikeris klal. To the point where no one even realized that the original stones were taken. V'nisgagel hadavar al yedei maral miprag al pi mofis nifla shehaganav haya muchrach ba'atzmo lahachzer haganeva limkomo. But through the Maral Miprag's intervention, he was able not only to return those precious stones, but to have the Ganav himself be Bekayim Veheshiv Esa Ganeva through incredible nisim, Maisa Pella. Now in this sefer, he not only tells the story at great length and intrigue and mystery, but he also has all of the names of the people who were involved. A fellow by the name of Captain Willis, a Professor Andreas, other names that sound vaguely familiar with those a little bit connected with English literature. So this entire story, explains Dr. Shner Lyman, is actually found in one of the many short stories authored by Sir Arthur Conan Doyle. What was he known for? Sherlock Holmes, right? So the original Sherlock Holmes was actually the Maharal Prague. So Sir Arthur Conan Doyle was a British author. He was well known for his mystery novels and short stories. And in 1899, he published a short story entitled The Jew's Breastplate. And in this story, he speaks about the exact story, stealing the stones of the Choshen, replacing them with glass stones that had the same color. And that was in 1899. The Sefer of Rev Yehuda Rosenberg that was published, Choshen HaMishpat, was about 10 years later. Now, what's even more fascinating, Dr. Schneur-Lyman points out that there's an autobiography by Leah Rosenberg. Leah Rosenberg was the daughter of Rabbi Rosenberg, and her sefer is entitled The Errand Runner, Reflections of a Rabbi's Daughter. And she speaks about the fact that her father had her do many things on his behalf. And one thing that her father was very interested in was learning Russian, right, to be able to not only be a Rav in his town, in Montreal, but to almost work his way up the corporate ladder to be able to make a higher salary and to hopefully be more influential. So he learned Russian, and the publications of Sir Arthur Conan Doyle were translated into Russian. So it seems pretty clear that he basically took the Jew's breastplate that was first published in 1899 and translated it into Hebrew using the exact same names and same places. Now you might ask, okay, maybe Conan Doyle got the story from the same manuscript that Rabbi Rosenberg got it from. Only problem with that is, it doesn't seem like Conan Doyle knew how to read Hebrew. And when you actually read through the manuscript, which of course Dr. Schneur-Lyman did, he said you see very strong points throughout the story that the story did not originally take place in the 16th century. For example, when Captain Willis is telling the Maharal how he was able to know exactly what the stones look like, to be able to manufacture his own to replace them, he writes there, I brought in a small camera with me and took pictures of the stones, right? So obviously, if this took place in 1590, it was very difficult to bring in a small camera before a camera was invented.
The Golem, he not only invented the Golem, he also invented the camera.
Exactly.
He was way ahead of his time.
Exactly. Now, what's interesting is it sounds like, when you look at this at first glance, basically what's being discovered here is that these two svarim of Rabbi Rosenberg don't seem to be authentic. Now, Rabbi Rosenberg himself was a very chashuv Rav. We know that from his other svarim. We know that as well from correspondence that he had. There is a 70th anniversary Jubilee souvenir book that was put out in celebration of his 70th birthday in Montreal. And this Dr. Schneur-Lyman found in a library in Montreal. And it has the whole biography of Rabbi Rosenberg. And the very back of the book, it has all of his svarim, all of his works that he wrote throughout the years. And they were divided into three categories. Rabbinish svarim, and the Rabbinish svarim you have Mikveh Yehuda, you have Yodos Nedarim, and the Sefer and Shatnez and Shilas and Shuvas. Second category is Drush Svarim, where you have his translation and commentary on the Zohar. You have his Sefer and Chumash. And the third category is entitled Folk Literature. And in folk literature, there you have Niflos Maharal and Choshen HaMishpat and a few others. Folk literature means, right, historical fiction, Pashut Pshat. So what's happening here is that it seems very clear, based on this incredible and exciting research of Dr. Schneur Lyman that these two svarim, being in the category of folk literature, means that Rabbi Yehuda Rosenberg was never intending to fool the world, that these things actually took place. These are true accounts of the Maral. What he was doing is writing good Jewish stories so young men and women could have some kosher literature to benefit from. This is during a time when many things were being published that were totally inappropriate, and likely he felt the call of the hour was to have some good kosher fiction, historical fiction for the Yidden based on a Jewish premise. And that explains why there are no haskamas in those two svarim, but you have many haskamas in his halachic literature. So this is not at all painting Rabbi Yehuda Rosenberg in a negative light. The contrary, he was doing a wonderful tova for Klal Yisrael, never intending for these svarim to be taken literally at face value. So did the Maral himself create a golem? The answer is, we have no idea. Maybe, maybe not. Do the stories that we have in the Niflos Maral depict what actually happened? To that, the answer is no. Were some of them based on things that may have taken place? Perhaps. But it's important to know where stories come from and to be able to be mavchin, to discern that sometimes you could have a Mesorah that may have some truth to it, but it doesn't mean that every story we hear throughout the years or we happen to read in a kid's book about the Maral and the Golem is true. When we say the 13 Yud Gimel Midos, you don't find any of them. Ani Mamin B'Amunah Shalema, that any story that has been passed down throughout Yiddishkeit in the last 300 years must be true no matter what. Always look at things from an honest, intellectual standpoint. Have a wonderful day.